Hello and welcome to the DnD420 Podcast. This is a show dedicated to helping you become a better dungeon master. I'm your host, Eric M. Hunter, and I am a struggling game master trying to figure out how to tell a better story. Joining me shortly is Jimmy Shields. He is the creator of DnD420 and an avid D&D fan with over 30 years of experience. In this episode, we have a very special guest, a very good friend of ours who is part of the DnD420 Guild, Nathan. He's been a dungeon master for the better part of 10 years, loads of experience. I personally have played in a couple of his games, and his worlds are so well crafted and interesting and odd in most places that help jarg the senses that we couldn't not have him on the show. So this episode, we go back to the original 4 sessions of the show I think we've done so far, and kind of get his perspective on everything from character development to environments and story building and campaign and outlining. So I hope you guys pull something away from this episode to get another perspective of a very good DM. All right, so I am happy to announce we have a very special guest with us. Nate is a huge fan of D&D. I've played in 2 of your games, I believe, now. Just a wonderful storyteller, lots of in-depth knowledge in terms of taking time with developing your world. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast with us. And this whole episode is basically just to get a different perspective of the things that we've been talking about in the past 4 episodes. So if it works for you guys, we can just kind of take it episode by episode. And let me pull my notes up. All right. So episode 1 was basically just how do you start a D&D campaign? And my idea was to start with kind of a rough outline, and then we kind of moved on from there in terms of how we discussing characters and stuff like that. So, Nate, can you kind of talk to us about how, when you personally start building a campaign, like what are these are my 5 steps when I first start designing a campaign?
5, Nate.
I want 5. We're going to bullet them, list them.
Not 4.
Not 3. And definitely 5. Not 6.
Doing 5.
Or as many as you got. I mean,
just whatever works out.
Yeah. Well, the first one is important about the world you're playing in or the general setting, whether it's like a pre-constructed one like Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms, or just one that you're home brewing. Because that's
Greyhawk.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that sets the backdrop of your story and kind of helps you put like the elementary things into it. Second, I think, is collecting backstories from your players as early as possible is good, because some players will give you really awesome and in-depth backstory. Some of them will not, but the ones that give you material helps you as a story writer kind of fill in gaps or give you ideas to go along, and tying their, I feel, immerses and engages those players more, and makes it feel more special to them,
Yeah, I feel like that's something that, and maybe, again, this is just me being new for the most part to all of this, but like, well, yeah, of course the players are important. Of course the characters that they're playing are important. But like, no, man, that is the foundation of all of this. Like, you could have all the coolest shit in the world.
If you really want to run a great game where your players are involved and they go home week after week and say, "Oh my God, I can't fucking believe it," then they've got to be involved. They've got to be the most important thing. Because if you're just going to run a pre-constructed game, that's cool. But more often than not, it's not going to end that way. It's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. They're going to have a good time. But we're talking about making your game better and really engaging your players. And this is how
I mean, because in the end, like, writing the story and running the game is fun for the DM. But in the end, like, they're the ones who's going to enjoy it the most, is the players, the ones that you've invited, the ones you're hosting it for. And those little hooks, from their backstories really feed into that for them. And you don't have to go, hot and heavy on it immediately. You can be 3 or 4 sessions in before you even hit at one of them. and again, it just kind of spices that up for them as they go. And then sometimes they have great ideas that you didn't think about that, you know, help lead into like a sub storyline or things of that nature.
Yeah, I think we touched on that in one of the sessions or one of the episodes, but it also kind of feeds into what we were talking about now, how we got so far in this. We got to episode 4 before I said, who are your fucking players, man? Right. Who are your players?
Yeah, and knowing who they are, what their characters are going to be like, it kind of helps you gear things for them and more toward them.
Agreed, yeah. And I mean, it also gives you kind of the thing we got stuck on where he was talking about the computer situation where it's not just your players, but those backstories, like you mentioned, Nathan, they're so important because it's not just a backstory. It also says, well, I have a rogue guy who specializes in computers. Oh, well, I can do a hacking situation. Or I have, you know, perhaps I've got 2 Jedi. You know, well, I better do something where Jedi are involved or they're going to be standing around with their thumb up their ass the whole time.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, players will give you a real generic backstory like that. Or sometimes they'll give you something really deep, like 2 pages worth of material. And just whatever they give you, you know, it's worth investing into for them because it's going to make the game more intriguing and engaging for them.
Yeah, and it's not even just the story. It's everything from your storyline to plot hooks, subplots, what kind of checks are we going to be making throughout the game and how tough are they going to be? Because, I mean, if you got in D&D, if you got nobody who can climb, I doubt you're going to be going into a mountainous area.
Right. So it is. To me, it feels more like it's, okay, I need to get this piece of information across, or I need to get this very important item to somebody. How I do that and how that is conveyed is through the backstory. It's through the character's abilities. So, like for the hacking the computer thing, again, to bring that up, it was less about how cool would it be to hack a computer. It's more about, I need to get this very important piece of information to the group. What is the most interesting way I can do it? And just off the top of my head, it's like, oh, we'll make it a computer. But again, you know, if there's nobody in the group knows how to hack, then it's worthless. But, you know, somebody might be good at interrogation. So now maybe one of the guys isn't, and one of the enemies isn't dead. And you can have this guy interrogate him or
exactly
whatever. The end result is always the same. It's just how you get there is what changes.
Exactly. Or the difficulty, because, I mean, you can do the computer situation with no hackers. You just got to make it a little easier because you can't give it a challenge rating 18 if nobody's got any points in it, or they'll never get the information. So that'll help you set challenge ratings as well by seeing those characters in front of you. Oh, well, I can't put this super computer, giant mainframe, impossible to get into thing if there's no hacker. You can put a laptop there then. Why not?
Right.
If that's your delivery method. Right. If that's your delivery method, then you can make it a simple puzzle to get in for the characters, for the players more so when I say puzzle, I guess. But that's, you know, depending on your style of play.
Sometimes their backstory even helps you generate NPCs because if they have an in-depth backstory, they may have you know, people in that backstory. Like, let's say you're a soldier that was discharged from the Empire because you're doing a Star Wars game, that you were discharged from the Empire because you had a particular issue with a commander or a general. You know, as the story goes on, you could incorporate that particular character into the game.
In fact, I believe you should at some point, at least in a small way.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll make that person who wrote that backstory feel very special for that period of time. And that's another way of hooking people in and getting them more and more invested in your game.
One of the things that we touched on in episode 2 was creating a DM played character. And Jim had mentioned that in a lot of circles, like it's a lot of other game masters are like, that is not something you do. Like NPCs are exactly what they're supposed to be, non-playable characters. Nate, what is your position on that? What is your thought on that?
I personally feel it depends on your party and the amount of players you have in your party. Like if you're running a full party or whatever the amount is you're comfortable, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6 players, it may bog down the game a little bit. If you have a group that's like real heavy in the role playing and are really good at it, then they can take the game on their own. But some NPCs have to be in there to drive the story and direct the party. They don't always need to be like by their side and a continuous member of this party, popping up sporadically, or just some kind of loose connection is good, I feel. It just depends on what your party needs too. Like if they don't have a healer, if they don't have a tank and you have to fill that particular slot, then NPCs are great for that.
Yeah, that reminds me of a time with you guys where I made a mute, depressed cleric who was touched by his god, and he never spoke a word, and he had all the feats where he could still cast, and he was chosen by his deity. You guys had a healer with you for a period of time. I believe an adventure, right? Where there was the mute, depressed healer.
I believe so. I played in most of your games, so I would assume I was there.
I think you both were. It was just a cool way for me to add something in and say, the ability for me is there. And he had some really cool spells, and it was a really neat situation. And I didn't have to cut you guys off. I didn't have to do a whole lot. Since he was kind of timid and meek, he didn't even get involved in combat. He was just there to heal you guys.
Yeah, and then see, that's perfect for that situation. I feel like in our current Sunday game, like the players are all really good and engaged in the game, and the role playing is pretty much active from the time we start to the time we finish, that there isn't no need for like a prodding NPC to be there. Or
Right. It also kind of brings me back, though, with that. I'm kind of glad you said that, because that does, in a game where you have a heavy role playing group, playing an NPC that's not that involved, where as you notice, when we get to certain situations, I'll have somebody that I get to role play, because I can go and turn the computer on and wait a half an hour for you guys to hit a part where you're not role playing, and I can kind of interject and say,
Right.
Okay, let's get the game moving now. There for a half an hour sometimes, and let you guys roll, because you're giving me ideas, you're role playing, you're in character, the storyline is moving, albeit kind of slowly at that point, but who cares if we're all having fun. But that's where playing like a DM NPC kind of comes in for me, where they don't necessarily have a ton of abilities, or they don't necessarily matter to the game. It's just a time for me to get a chance to role play as well,
and to kind of help move the story along if the players are kind of
sometimes they need prodding, where they'll get bogged down. You just need to move them along. In a previous session, you guys have talked about the death of NPCs, and I feel killing off NPCs can have a huge impact on the game and make for a really good story, especially if it's like an NPC that they've been connected to, and they have a lot of dealings with. It's like in the Pirate's Life, we had Melf, right? We'd always show up and stop and visit him, and he would send us messages.
I remember Melf.
Right? we had a lot of he was with us all the time. But he was there, when we needed him. We could stop by his place. Yep. He would give us supplies and advice and all this kind of stuff. Like, he eventually built this rapport with the group where we all knew him, we all liked him. But if it would have come to like some kind of incident killing him, or him dying, however, it would have made an impact and stirred emotions within your players.
Oh, it would have been huge, yeah.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, that's what you're trying to do as a DM is affect your players on that kind of level.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do is to make you feel emotions as your character. You get so involved in the story that you get upset, physically upset, as Oleg the dwarf or whatever, and then you can shut it off at the end of the day and be like, that was awesome. I was so mad as that dwarf, and you physically felt that rush of anger enter your body. That's at no other time, to me, personally, do I feel like that's the best connection to Dungeons and Dragons or any RPG that you can get, is feeling that emotion as your character.
Yeah, and it makes good storytelling too. I know me and Jim were talking about this the other day about when players drop from a game or whatever the case may be. Like, do you continue on with their character as an NPC or do you kill them off?
Oh, okay. So let's talk about that, because that's something we haven't talked about on the show before. Like that's super interesting. So because that's a real life thing. Like we're older, we all have jobs. A lot of us have kids. You know, like it's getting down once a week. You think is not that big a deal until you hit in your 30s and 40s, and you're like, man, getting down once a week to play D&D for a few hours is fucking tough. You know, it's like. So, okay, let's talk about that. That's interesting. So how do, Nate, we'll start with you. So how do you personally deal with a character who literally just like, I'm done, I got to go, I can't play anymore?
You don't know how relevant that is right now, Eric.
Yeah.
Oh, weird. Okay.
So it's gonna depend on what kind of investment as a DM you have into that player. Like how much are they tied into the big story arc, the overall story arc, and things like that. The times I've had to do it, they weren't really attached too much to it, but they've been with the party since the beginning of the game. So, you know, they did, 15, 16 sessions. And when I knew that they weren't going to be able to continue the game, I piloted the player as an NPC for one session. And then he died in a heroic way. It was this barbarian named D. Payne. And they're in this like really tough fight, and it was like a self-sacrificing kind of incident where I think he like charged forward and tackled the monster off of this ledge into this chasm.
Reminiscent of the mighty Wolfgar.
Nice.
Yeah, very much so. And it affected the players because now he's more than NPC, right? They've played with him for session after session. He had this personality that the player brought to life, all these like connections, and now he's gone. And he died in a very heroic way. Sometimes they can be, they can die horribly, or just depending on how your story's going and what's best for that.
You touch on a really nice point there too, like how connected to your story is it? And then we talk about these backstories and connecting your players and their characters deeply into your story. And then when you do that and they quit just out of the blue, because of life getting in the way, that makes it seem like, was it a mistake for me? Well, hell no, because of what you just said. That did the exact thing that we were just talking about. It created that emotional response when that particular character, D. Payne, died in combat. So that ended up being a beautiful thing. So it's all about how you handle those things. And, I'm dealing with it where that's exactly what's happened to me. See, D. Payne didn't tie much in with your story, but in my Sunday game, one of my longest running players who, Eric, when you and Nathan both started in my game, you, Nate, and Bert all started at the same time. So I've been playing with you guys, 11 years plus, 12 years?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So that was the first game that Bert played in too, and both of you, I think. And Bert's been pretty much a standard. Yeah, a staple. Yeah. That's the word I'm looking for. And, he can't do it now. He's got his reasons, and we spoke about that. But what I did is, this is Volcaminar, a dwarven city where we've got everybody else is not a dwarf. And then Bert is playing this badass dwarf who we start to find out he's got like these royal connections. And he's kind of on the lower end of the dwarven hierarchy. His clan is very small, something like 30 dwarves. And I had this really cool thing planned out for him in the future that I've sown all these seeds for. Everything from the cloak to the encounter with one of his ancestors to cool combat stuff that we couldn't have done without him being the dwarf character. So things on a small level and things on a huge story arc level. And now I've got to decide, how am I going to handle all that, because so much went into it.
Yeah.
Well,
he's tied deeply into the story and stuff. So like losing him, just like killing him off is not so easy.
Yeah, it's not easy, but we'll figure out what happens Well,
Yeah.
no spoilers, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out, and I'm really excited about all of that actually, because it's going to completely change the game now, because we got another guy coming in to take his place, and he's not playing a dwarf, so the entire aspect of the party has changed because it's a dwarven society that you're going back to.
And we kind of lost our ambassador. He was like, our official ambassador to getting things from that side of the gate for us.
Yeah, now your umbrella, your protection, your ambassador, your connection is gone.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Wow.
And it's fun to see how players are going to react and what they're going to do. After D Payne had died and they'd made it back to their hometown, they all pitched money forward to have this statue erected of D Payne in the middle of the town.
He's forever etched into that kingdom now.
Yeah. It was added into that town's description, and he even had like a sword that was on fire, and they had that put into the statue's hand.
Oh, that's very cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of going back into NPCs. When we were talking about NPCs, Jim kind of laid out like a very no-nonsense way. Here's a bunch of character names, here's a bunch of characteristics, and then he kind of just picks and chooses. This is mainly just for like people that you randomly run into town, maybe need a bit of information, or maybe it's an item shop owner. Do you have anything that you kind of just always fall back on and of like your starting point and then build from when creating NPCs?
You want to think about your story and like which MPs are crucial to have and which ones you're going to need to drive the story. And I feel those are the ones that are going to get the most flushed out. They're going to have backstories. They're going to have characteristics and probably even stats for those particular NPCs, because they're more important to the story, and you know that your players are going to have interactions with them. As far as like randomly generating them, like you guys talked about on the last session, that's great for those like single serving NPCs that you'll come across: bartenders, performers, town folk, things like that.
Yeah, anybody your players talk to that you didn't expect them to talk to.
Exactly, yeah.
And I kind of wanted to add to that a little bit as well, because I felt like I left a piece off of there about NPCs that I feel like is very important. And I think it, since it's DnD420, I can make excuses all I want. But the thing that I wanted to allude to, in addition to what I talked about, is your NPCs have jobs to do. Not necessarily their profession so much as for the story. There are types of NPCs to think about as well. How are they going to move the story along? We keep talking about NPCs that move the story along and such, but how? Because if you have just NPCs that I don't know how they're going to interact and all that, then you're just kind of slinging it at the wall and seeing if it'll stick. But if you give them each like you were talking about earlier, Eric, an interesting piece of information, because a character may have a good intimidate, or he might be able to extract information or whatever.
Right.
Those are also things that's like, well, what role does it play in the story? And those types of things are, you need a heel or a bad guy. How bad is he? Because you can have bad guys on multiple levels. You can have your big bad guy. You can have his lieutenants, his commanders, his infantrymen, his grunts. You can also have bad guys that aren't necessarily attached to him or even a rival to this big main bad guy. And those are a lot of fun and also very important. You can also have people who are bad, but they're not bad guys. And what I mean by that is more so they may be evil, but they're not up to evil. They might be doing things that aren't connected to the story, and these things might be meant to lead you off track a little bit. And you got to be careful with that, because those are sometimes the people that the players might latch on to. And like you talked about with the guy earlier, maybe a messenger, or you might need people who help out or assistance to the group, and you might need people who are against the group, an antagonist who's not a bad guy at all, but maybe the group has done something, or has a bad person that hangs with them, or a rogue or something like that, that they're trying to kind of go against the group or even compete with the group. So there's so many different ways of making these guys, and having NPCs feel just a huge, and the more different types of NPCs you have there, filling these different corners of your game, the more believable it's going to feel in your world.
Yeah, it feels like it's more full. Like there's an answer for everything basically, regardless of what the situation is. And then what you were mentioning before, reminded me of Pirate's Life, where Nick's character was what was he? He was a rogue of some sort, but he was like a backstabbing head of shadow.
He was an assassin, I think. In the end,
right? And he had his whole I'm running around with this crew and we're doing this thing and we're flying the ship in space and it's a lot of fun. What do you need me to do? You need me to take out? I'll just switch off real quick. He had his own agenda, which seemed like there were times, at least maybe in my mind, remembering back, where it was like, oh, we did go to that one place for no reason, really, except for Nick's character had to run around and go do something, and then he came back, and that was it. You know what I mean? Just little things like that.
That's the kind of hook that's in the player's backstory that you ride into. If they're going to be an assassin and they're going to have these kind of opportunities arise, which is what Nick was doing a lot,
Right.
And some players, that's all they want, and they want their character to grow and flesh out, and some players just want the story to do that. So it's about a balance, really. That, to me, that seems just intuitive or natural, but it can be very difficult when it comes down to making it feel that way, because like you said, we go someplace and his character might run off on a little mission, so I'd have to keep the other players a little bit busy while he was able to go knife somebody in the back real quick.
Right.
So that can be a really delicate balance, actually.
Yeah, and it's a matter of balancing your NPCs too, the ones that you're going to invest a lot of time and effort into, and then the ones that you're not. Mama Bink from the Blue Moon, she was a completely flushed out character, stats, backstory, all that. But the other people that you met at the carnival, not as much.
Oh, Mama Binks. That's one of the... I answered a question, who was my favorite NPC we'd ever run into, and I forgot about her. How did I forget about Mama? I talked about a different NPC, and Mama Binks was the one, man. That's the coolest NPC I've definitely ever met in a game.
She was so sweet.
She was also scary. She's scary as fuck. What? Tell us, just for fun here, we gotta just tell us a little bit about Mama Binks. Give us a little bit of a rundown so that our listeners know who that we're gushing over.
She was a elderly gnoll, and kind of had a gypsy fortune teller vibe to her, and she was the lead of this carnival that would just appear as almost mystic. You might be lucky to find it once in your life, kind of thing. And she knew that these players were all going to be drawn to her, and she had a foresight about their past and their destiny, and she was there to make sure that they started that path.
Yeah, she gave us some really cryptic information that by the end of the game was oh my god, that was amazing.
I still remember the first time we met her. It was my character and I want to say maybe Bert's character, but they were oh no, you have to leave your weapons before you walk in. We're we're not going in. This is terrifying. We don't feel comfortable just taking our weapons down.
We're going into a magic using gnolls little shed. This seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, and it was more like a sweat lodge that you guys were going into.
That's right. Eating that nasty ass food. Okay, so to kind of wrap up all of this, I want to end with the last episode we just had, which was about session 1, preparation for session 1, expectations, that kind of thing. So you know your characters, you have a kind of a quick outline of how the entire campaign is going to go. What does your first session look like?
I think focusing on how the party meets and how to hook them into the story is important for session 1. Because if it's not written in their backstories or, key to the story that they know each other, bringing them all together can be a big fun and memorable event. Like, again, for the Blue Moon, none of you guys know each other, but at the fair, you all got tickets, and they darkened the big top, and so many tickets glue blue, and those people were asked to stay behind and receive this prize, and it was all the party members whose tickets glue.
Yeah, and that was a cool way to meet, actually. But it also kind of brings me to what I would say is a very important session 1 focus would be interaction among the characters. It could also mean interaction among the players, because on our Sunday game, which is my main game, all these players have played together time and time again, so it's not about the players getting to know each other. But at a session 1 or even a session 0, like in my Saturday game, few of the players had ever played before, either with me or together in a group, and some of them were meeting for the first time ever. And so that it's also about that, who is this guy I'm about to role play with, and now that we're role playing, who is this guy that I'm about to go on an adventure with, or girl, or whoever, who are these people I'm about to adventure with? Because I feel like if you don't focus on that at least a little bit, then you're going to have people that continuously this generic relationship, and it's going to be difficult to put emotions in. If you can make it to where these characters know each other in a way that's more than just superficial, that's a huge bonus. So that's a really nice thing to focus on.
Yeah, I feel like after just us talking and like looking back over things, like session 1 is less about what happens in the session and more about just trying to get the players engaged, maybe even to the point where it's like, oh, again, knowing what the characters are and what the players and how they're going to play them. But like, oh, character A has this really cool feat that nobody else has. Maybe I should try to showcase that, just to be like, hey, look at this really cool thing that this guy can do, to try to build that credibility back into the group. Because we talked about a little bit about how regardless of how in-depth and in the game you want to play, there is always meta going on with your players. And it's like, and I explained that with the Saturday game, where I'm playing with 2 people I've never played with before. So it's like, okay, I know they know how to play. I know, they might know their characters, but it's like, I know I'm supposed to trust their characters in the game because I've known them for so many years, but like, do I trust the player who's playing the character? And so there was a very odd relationship building there, because not knowing who these people are, not knowing who these characters are, quote unquote, out of game. It's like, yeah, okay, this guy's always got your back. He's been your best friend since high school. It's like, all right, that's great. I've had best friends from high school stab me in the back, 10, 15 years down the road. Is he going to be that guy, or is he literally going to be the dude that stands by me, So having that interaction at that first session, maybe even that second session, is maybe even partially more important than actually what happens within the session. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, ideally you want the players to meld together real good and get going and be on the same page, but it's not always like that, because there's some distrust in the characters, or they'll have to get past that hurdle.
It could be even something as small as like a different alignment,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And ways to do that, like you said, maybe somebody can showcase a feat or a skill or an ability. Also, whatever's in their backstory, maybe somebody has a fear that you want to just shed a little bit of a light on, so that people can, other characters can talk to them about it and say, well, what happens? Or maybe there's somebody's connected to a political figure or a royal figure, and you can say, well, how are you so connected, and get them interacting as their characters, and there may be very few roles made in some of these situations. It's more so eliciting, pulling those things out of the characters, having the players get a chance to say, instead of starting the session by reading backstories, which is also a fun thing to do. I'm not going to say that's bad by any means, but
No.
more so role playing it out and saying, well, I don't really want to talk about it, or now we see here this guy doesn't want to talk about it. Well, why don't you want to talk about it?
Sounds like Darius' backstory.
It does, actually. I wasn't referring to Darius or Shane's character in Nate's game.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Two shady motherfuckers there, but
Shit going on.
But I mean, that colors the character because they don't want to talk about it. So that is the color that the other people get. Like, well, I don't trust you. And
Right.
that's cool because I trust Shane very well in playing, but I sure didn't trust that character.
It's such a crazy dynamic that you just, I mean, I've said this countless times already, but like this game is it's just so different than anything else out there, you know, like it's so different than a movie or a book or a video game or a board game. Like there's so many intricacies. Yes.
Smoke another.
Yeah.
Well, I feel a lot. The options are almost endless. Settings, stories, character build, character types, personalities. There's so many variables, and every game is different on all those levels.
Right,
It's
yeah,
so
and
much
not
more.
even not even just D&D. Like I'm building a Star Wars game, but there's Matrix, there's Star Trek, there's fantasy, there's sci-fi, there's medieval, there's every possible subgenre you could think of. I just special ordered the Stranger Things DVD book. Like I'm super excited to read that D&D book, like because it's based off Stranger Things. Like it's so odd.
Yeah.
So, Jim, what were you gonna say?
I mean, yeah, I don't know when. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's even much more book, and I was going to allude to that, like the Stranger Things thing. There is a book for that now, yeah. But I know that there's people who play in campaign settings that resemble of Fire and Ice or the popular HBO series,
Right.
Game of Thrones. And there's everything else. There are video game ones. I know that I've read a story about people who are playing as if they were in the world of Zelda, you know, and that's cool too. So
Yeah.
it's so much more than that's in the book, and it's so much more. Now you can play exactly what's in the book, and people get caught up in rules lawyering. To me, are kind of missing out because how you interpret these rules in a real game setting is it needs to be fluid. It needs to be quick. It needs to be interesting, not just by the book every single time. Yes, do stay by the book if you can. If somebody at the table knows the ruling, do stay by that.
Right.
Stand by that if you can.
Yeah, you don't want to bog your session down with 20 minutes here and 20 minutes there of looking up rules and things like that.
Yeah, and it's important to trust whoever the eldest playing member who knows. Like we have Tommy, and he really knows the game. And if you ever feel like as a player in some of my games that, well, Jim's wrong on this, you can always kind of defer to Tommy, and we let him be the guy that says, no, this is how it is. And then I humble myself and say, okay. And then we look it up afterwards, and at the beginning of the next session, okay, guys, this is the ruling. We looked it up. We were both wrong.
And this is how we're going to play it from now on. Yeah.
But in that moment, let's not stop. Especially if you're doing something like a Legend of Zelda game, which hats off to you guys. That's such a cool idea. Whoever that is. That some of the rules aren't going to work that well from the book. You're going to have to fudge some things in or come up with a ruling on your own as a storyteller or as a group that you want to talk about. And it can come up in session 0 and say, hey, we're playing in the Legend of Zelda world. these are some things we need to think about, or it can come up on the fly. And both ways, it's very important, but it's also important not to get too caught up and to figure it out outside of, because we talked about being 30s and 40s, how it's hard to pull together 4 or 5 hours to do this
Right.
as a group. We all have 4 or 5 hours at some point in the week, but at the same time,
It's crazy.
let's not spend it arguing over rules.
Right.
Yeah.
Nate, do you have like any kind of closing thoughts that you want to approach onto us?
I feel when you're world building and putting together a story, consistency and believability is important. You want to think about your environments, what kind of flora and fauna is in them environments. I feel that stuff's very important when making a story, because you want to make it seem real, even though we're playing these sci-fi and fantasy worlds. They still have these set boundaries that you gotta fit within, and I think the more believable the setting, and the further that'll go for you.
Yeah, and you used a word there that I love to use, and I don't know if that's because we play in each other's games so much, but it's not realism, because we're mages and dragons and rangers, but it's believability, and you achieve that by exactly what you said. Knowing you don't have to put everything that you've learned about the campaign setting into the game. In fact, that would be tedious, monotonous for the players. But when they're asking, what does that look like? Or what I'm in this jungle, what's around me? Be specific. What plants do I see? And if you can just on the whim nail a couple of things that, like we talked about in an earlier session, that everyone can relate to because you've seen these things yourself, or you know what that feels like to have the heat and the humidity and the wet feeling and the shade where the sun's hidden from you in the middle of a jungle. You know what that feels like, smells like, and you can portray it to your characters in a believable way with fantastic things. You've just sowed those seeds of believability that when something else crazy happens, we're invested. This world is real.
And that goes the same for, again, like the monsters and creatures and people that they're encountering in these different environments. You want to make sure that they're making sense and that they fit there in a realistic way. Like if you're in a swamp, you're going to be expecting to be seeing like larger insects, reptiles, maybe carnivorous plants, things of that nature. You're not going to find like a lion or something from a tropical environment, or
right. You're grounding it in reality.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Very important. So I just want to take this time now, because I know that we're running a little longer. I thought we might having 3 of us on today, but I'm totally cool with that, and hopefully our listeners are too. But I just want to give a shout out to kind of our sister podcast, and in DnD420, we've got the recaps for Vulcan and R and the From Dust game, and those guys have it's an awesome podcast that they're doing called From Dust Recap, and then they have another one that they do called After Dust, which kind of reminiscent of The Walking Dead and The Talking Dead, where they get a little bit deeper into their characters, and they're pretty much all stoned and just kind of talking about how their characters feel in that one. So, if you get a chance, that's on YouTube, that's on Spotify. All you have to do is search up DnD420. That's the letters DnD, just like this, 420, the number, and you'll find it. Those guys are hilarious, a lot of fun. I think Nathan is actually you've From Dust Recap recently, right? Got back in on that.
Yeah, that and the After Dusk as well.
Yeah, it's good times. Good, it's fun to listen to. I try to keep my opinions out of those and let that be player driven, which is a cool tool. Also, just to mention to you all listening, if you can be a fly on the wall when your characters talk about your game, if you can figure out a way to do that, like I have with the From Dust and After Dust, your game's gonna just do nothing but benefit. It's been the best move I've ever made. And I appreciate my players for it, and I get to hear what they appreciate about my game. It's just reciprocal good times. So do listen in, like and subscribe, come join us, tell us why we suck, comment, tell us why we're funny, whatever. Ask questions about the characters involved.
Interact.
Get involved yourself. Interact.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the DnD420 Podcast. For everything DnD420 related, check out DnD420.com. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us there on the website and on YouTube at DnD420. Lastly, as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can do that by telling another DM about the show and by visiting us on Apple Podcasts and leaving a rating and review. Thanks for subscribing and being a part of our work here at DnD420. We will see you next week.